Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to TME Presents When Sustainability Conflicts with Security. You've read the article. Now, learn the rest of the story. I'm Daniel Wheatley, the Associate Editor for the Military Engineer, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all here today. Before we get started, though, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to best participate in today's event. All the attendees are in a listen-only mode for the presentation, but you can use the chat pane to chat with your fellow attendees. Everybody, let's try that now by typing in where we're listening from today. For me, I am coming to you live from Northern Virginia. You can submit questions for our presenters at any time by using the questions pane on top of your control panel. We will collect these and address as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. And please also submit any technical issues you may be encountering here as well. And you see we've got all sorts of people. We've got people from Germany, San Antonio, Tampa, Minnesota, Florida. It's great to have you all here with us. Texas, Connecticut, thank you all for making it out here this afternoon. Originally published in the November-December 2021 issue of TME, When Sustainability Conflicts with Security, addressed the challenges of building sustainable building design and construction mandates that often conflict with DoD mission readiness objectives. Navigating between sustainability and security was essential for a new administrative facility at Schriever Air Force Base in Colorado Springs, Colorado. It needed to meet both the security standards for the restricted area of the base and also qualify for LEED Silver certification. We'll hear more about that project in today's presentation. I would now like to introduce the article authors and today's featured speakers. Jennifer Olson is the Architectural Technical Discipline Lead for Stanley Consultants in the company's Muscatine, Iowa office. Her project responsibilities have included building analysis, redesign, draft analysis, code analysis, design development, cost analysis, construction documentation, and administration. Jessica Olson is the Minneapolis office architectural department manager for Stanley Consultants. A graduate of the University of Kansas with over 15 years of experience, she's worked on an array of project types ranging from K-12 schools, offices, and industrial projects to interpretive centers. I'll now turn it over to our featured speakers for their presentation.
Thanks, Daniel. So today we want to talk about a topic that a lot of you, I'm sure, have run into, where there's a huge push in the industry to be as sustainable and as good of a steward to the environment on your design team as you possibly can. But the problem is when it comes to government facilities, oftentimes we have really strong security requirements that really conflict and make the sustainability requirements very difficult to achieve to the level that those codes are written to. Today, I myself, I'm Jennifer Olson. I've been in the architecture industry for 15 years now, the last 8 with Stanley Consultants. And my primary focus has been federal DoD facility design and mostly secure facilities. I've done 9 of them in my tenure here at Stanley of all levels, from just programming all the way to new construction and even more complicated remodel facilities. My counterpart, Jessica Olson, she's has 17 years of design experience, and she's my sustainability go-to. She also works in our federal market, but she has her LEED BDC accreditation for the last 13 years, and more recently has obtained her Guiding Principles Compliance Professional certification. She's had that for 3 years. So today we're going to go over just a very brief history of LEED and just sustainability in general, both in the architectural design industry and engineering fields, as well as where it came into play with the government and when they started really catching on and trying to bring it in to their design codes through the UFCs and other standards. We're also going to go in the end and go through a project case study that I was the lead architect for at Schriever, and just talk about how us achieving LEED Silver, what issues we ran into, things where we had to find unique solutions to problems, but still keep the facility mission secure and meet their requirements to be able to do their job, which if you can't do that, what's the point of your building, right? And so finally, we're going to go through just those lessons learned and project conclusions and just some nice food for thought when you're at the beginning of a project with similar difficulties to maybe help you get there a little faster. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica to review the sustainability side of the presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I see in the chat that some people are having audio issues. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you loud and clear here, Jessica.
Okay. Well, thanks. I just realized that when I said that that other people are on mute, so just wanted to make sure. We all have technical difficulties at times. With that, a brief history of LEED and sustainable design as it pertains to the government. The first green building rating system emerged almost 30 years ago now in the early 1990s. It was actually BREEAM, the Building Research Establishments for Environmental Assessment Method, which was launched in the UK in 1990. And I guess in the United States in 1993, the United States Green Building Council, or USGBC, was formed, and that became the parent corporation or council that developed LEED, or Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, which did not come along until 5 years later in 1998. Other green building standards were also developing during this time period and shortly thereafter. These include the Living Building Challenge, ASHRAE 189.1, Green Globes, which is a rating system put together by the Green Building Initiative, or GBI, and the International Green Construction Code. That's one of the latest standards out there, which we'll talk about a little later. The U.S. government jumped on the bandwagon with its issuance of UFC 3-400-01 in 2002, and that was superseded by the UFC that we use today, which is 1-200-02, which came about in 2013. This contains the guiding principles for federal high performance and sustainable buildings. In that standard, the Energy Policy Act of 2005 is also referenced, which requires the federal agencies to increase efficiency and optimize their performance to eliminate the unnecessary use of resources and protect our natural environment. So as you can imagine, since 2013, this UFC has gone through several iterations. There have been some big swings back and forth. LEED was incorporated and encouraged as a third-party compliance mechanism, and then it was taken out. Now the UFC has been broadened to include other third-party rating systems for certification. The High Performance Sustainable Building Spreadsheet mimics the LEED design checklist. And over time, different third-party certification agencies, if you will, have adapted to create their own checklists that mimic what the High Performance Sustainability UFC is looking for. This UFC applies to all new and existing DoD projects. That said, there are some very limited exclusions. For example, if your building is a row or a report of excess or has a determination to dispose, this UFC does not apply. If it's an unoccupied building, which is defined as a building that is occupied less than 1 hour per person per day and meets the prescribed energy and water consumption limits, this does not apply. Now, those are some very slim exclusions. And the focus on this is to really hone in on our using our resources wisely. Primary focus areas include optimizing energy performance, which I think that's pretty self-explanatory, an integrated design process, which is working together to achieve maximum results. In that we're making sure that different systems within the building work together instead of against each other. Protecting and conserving water. Enhancing indoor environmental quality. That includes things like air quality, using environmentally friendly materials, things of that nature. Reducing environmental impact of materials. And something that was more recently added is addressing the climate change risk. So that includes things like making sure that your building is not in a floodplain, or if it is located in a floodplain, that you build up the site so that it can be better protected from those risks. The ultimate goal of the high performance sustainable building guiding principle compliance is to have 15% of federal building inventory meet these principles by 2025. I don't have the latest stats on where we're at in this goal, but 2025 is rapidly approaching. And before the seminar, Jennifer and I were talking about if this number has been increased at all. I have heard rumors that it will be stepped up, but those are kind of associated with the 2030 challenge and other initiatives by groups outside of the United States government. Facilities have 3 levels of compliance when it comes to guiding principles. You can either have full compliance, where you meet every, I guess, every point and every perspective principle. Partial compliance, where you comply with what you can, but what is not life cycle cost effective or what does not comply with the mission is not complied with, or where something is not applicable. And they really are tightening up on what they allow to be not applicable. I know previously that was a very broadly used category in the design industry. And people are kind of taking the challenge more seriously with all of the latest data concerning climate change and looking at how do we meet the intent of these credits rather than just trying to check the box. Something to note is that there are 2 different sections in the UFC that talk about guiding principles, compliance, tracking, and reporting. It's something where the requirements vary by military branch. It's required for all new buildings or standalone additions over 10,000 gross square feet in the Army and Navy. But for Air Force, this is something that is required for all new buildings and standalone additions, regardless of size. When it comes to existing buildings, the 10,000 gross square foot limit and total cost of $3 million or more is coupled with a 50% or more ERC to kick in the tracking and reporting requirements. Third-party certification is also required for new buildings and additions greater than 10,000 gross square feet and renovations that meet that 10,000 gross square feet, $3 million threshold, and the 50% or more ERC. So in the latest version of the UFC 1-200-02, with change one, which was issued this past January, the bar has kind of changed. There aren't a lot of substantial differences, but we have changed to complying with the International Green Construction Code 2018 version in place of ASHRAE 191 or 189.1, which was the previous benchmark. The great thing about this is that the IGCC was created by several industry groups, the AIA, the U.S. Green Building Council, the International Code Council, ASHRAE, and the IES were all involved in this joint initiative. So it brings together a lot of stakeholders that have common goals of creating a sustainable indoor environment. And with that, I'll pass it on to Jennifer to talk about our case study. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. So just to kind of tie this together, this chart kind of shows everything on the left-hand side is what Jessica just talked about. It's a lot of the key talking points in every single energy code, no matter which one you're looking at. These are a lot of the hot button issues. On the right-hand side, you'll see where oftentimes the mission security or even government design in general doesn't always jive with what those are asking for. And some of those are rooted in the UFC building codes we have to follow. But a lot of them come down to what the function of the building is. So the daylighting and views, that's always a really hard one when you're trying to design a building, especially under Tech Spec 705, which is the governing design document used to design SCIFs or SAPF facilities. Those documents are very specific about where you can and can't have windows or views to the outside to protect the secure information that's within the facility. So oftentimes that nixes that credit right from the get-go unless we're going to write some sort of argument as to why, well, we met this credit everywhere but in this one space that we couldn't because of this building code. Water efficient landscaping is another one we run into a lot, especially on military installations. Several of them have their own base design guides that will set standards for you. We'll put this type of planting in these locations at building entrances. And oftentimes those plantings don't jive with the water efficiency requirements. Some of them require year-round irrigation if you're located in a very arid location with no natural water. So obviously that makes that very difficult to establish those plants and keep them alive to meet the base campus look and feel without overriding what LEED or the sustainability codes are asking you to do. Material sourcing and credits. This one, there's a whole bunch of different credits in LEED and the other codes that deal with, you'll hear that 500-mile radius. That seems to be a real trigger point as the crow flies to try and get as much stuff local to your project site. Well, if you've ever been to a military installation, those usually are not near major industry locations and city centers and things where you can get a lot of materials readily available. So that 500-mile distance that sounds like a long way can be very challenging depending on where your final project location is. Um, that same thing, stormwater control can be very difficult. Most military bases don't have a lot of room for expansion, and they're fighting for every inch of space. A lot of that driven by the anti-terrorism force protection UFC, where they're dictating you need so much space between your buildings. And so it really limits where you can do your natural stormwater control or provide retention basins, or other means without having to just sheet flow off of your paved areas into your drainage below grade. Public transportation is another hot point. I know Leeds specifically, they refer to having access to at least 3 different forms of transportation, whether it be trains or walking to a bus stop within a certain distance. There's all sorts of different opportunities, but how many of those do you see on a military base? I think bus is about the only one I've ever been able to utilize. We never get beyond that. So it really just nixes that right from the beginning. We can't even consider it. There's just no options available to us. And then the last one is on-site renewable energy and green power. And this is one of those credits that is starting to evolve. I think people are starting to realize, and especially as technology catches up with the design world, how important and how valuable that green power source can be. In the past, and especially at the time of this case study project I'm about to talk about, green power was really difficult to get on military bases because oftentimes the equipment is still owned by the manufacturer, and we're just essentially renting space to them to put the equipment on site, or you have maintenance issues, things like that that don't always jive with a government site that's not owned on public land. And so it really came down to a lot of different contracting issues and things that, like, whose fund does this come from? Questions that really made this a difficult credit to even try to go after, even if the base was interested. Um, so with that, I will introduce the project. So this one, it's starting to get a little bit dated, but it's still a great project reference that I constantly go back to. It has a lot of unique qualities to it that we can use and evaluate on different projects. It was an administration facility. The scope of work was to provide a brand new building, but it was considered an addition because we were tying to an existing building. It was originally design began April 2015, and it was completed construction in February of 2017. And the total construction cost was around $13 million. Um, so the new facility is 2 stories, as was the existing. The existing is on the left side of the picture, right here, and the new is on the right side. And then we built the brown skywalk in between to allow the end users to have quicker access between the facilities. Um, it was done as a design build project with Tuner Perini. We started the whole process together in April, and Stanley Consultants was also part of the construction administration process. So we were a good team from day one all the way to the end. We were really watching the sustainability and the mission requirements. The new facility was designed for 73 full-time equivalent occupants. You'll see that acronym as FTE in the lead guides. And it was designed as a squadron command and administration support staff facility. Their existing facility was overcrowded. They had no flexibility to be able to rework the space. And so they really wanted to overcome a lot of those existing issues that really limited their existing building with this new facility. So our focus really was on max flexibility, allowing for the building to grow as the mission evolved. And so that was our key takeaway talking point in every single meeting, is how does this benefit the future and even the things we can't predict that might come up. It had various security levels in the facility. There was an existing skiff we were tying into on the existing building, and the new building had 2 floors with skiffs. So in the end, we ended up accrediting 3 different secure perimeters. So that right there was a huge coordination effort, let alone all of the sustainability requirements that we were trying to meet within all 3 of those boundaries. Um, it had very strict adjacency requirements. This building housed lots of different groups, and they spoke to each other quite frequently. And so we really didn't have a lot of flexibility to move the floor plan or the program areas around, because there was very specific adjacencies that were given to us that we could not change. Um, And then it was also deemed a mission critical facility. So this was something where we couldn't shut the power off to be able to connect in the new power because we couldn't shut down the existing facility. So we had to do things like hot tapping during construction, and really coordination and planning around what the existing mission was doing and the people were trying to accomplish that day. So there was a heavy coordination with everybody on site. And then the flexible workspaces, and I'll talk about that in additional slides too. Lots of ways to make this building work, but still allow for that not having to demo and use more fossil fuel power to create new products and new materials to make the facility work for the future. And then probably the biggest factor that made this project very challenging was that it's part of a very well established campus. Every building on this campus looked the same, used the same precast color panels, same doors, same everything. Like it was a very consistent installation. And on top of that, it's a pedestrian only campus. So everything was very set and working around sidewalks, but there's very few roads and very few access points to be able to get some of those additional sustainability credits. So just as a general overview of the site, um, so as I said, pedestrian campus. So you'll see on the top side of this picture, there is a parking lot, and that is where everybody on the site comes through, and they come through this pedestrian access point. So any of our credits that dealt with parking that had to be such limited distance or proximity to our building now had to be outside this fence line. The new facility is in the, sorry, let me change this color real quick so you guys can see better. There we go. So our new facility, you'll see there towards the top center, and then our walkway that you'll see down below. And then the existing facility is right there labeled to the right side of the screen. So that kind of gives you a little bit, and everything else is just the other facilities that were already in existence and adjacencies that we had to deal with. So here's kind of a really schematic programming level floor plan of what we had to deal with. Um, Majority of the program in this space was within that secure perimeter boundary. A total of 74% of the new construction we were designing had to be designed to tech spec 705. On the first floor, we had some more general spaces. We had an exercise room and some restrooms and a very small conference room for people who came who weren't cleared to enter the secure space. Everything else besides emergency circulation is within that perimeter. So we really had to pay attention to how our utilities came into the building and how they fed and worked between the secure perimeters, because we couldn't have um, the first floor touch the second floor. They had to be two separate secure areas. Um, and so we had to work through how those utilities ran between the buildings and how they connected on the walkway. One of the reasons, too, for this walkway is that the people who were occupying the new facility were also working still in the existing facility. And so they wanted these people to be able to badge in and badge out without having to go outside and go through the full security protocol. They could just go through a card reader. So there was a lot of coordination with the existing facility heights and how our walkway aligned on the site and where it could enter the building. So at the very beginning of the project, when we started programming, we went through our preliminary score sheet. Here's our credits we think we can get. Here's our maybes. Here's our there's no way, we don't think this is possible. And after sitting through and going through that list a few times, we came up with 58 that we thought, yeah, we can do this, and then 4 maybes. So we had a total of 62, and contract required us to be LEED silver, which required a minimum of 50. So we had about maybe 12 points of play from the get-go. So we felt pretty confident, okay, we can do this. Um, some of the things as we were going through design that just kept creeping up was the stormwater quality control was a big issue. Um, this was again, one of those sites where there wasn't a lot of space where we could put it down. And we really messed with where that lead boundary fell. We adjusted the site boundary that we set for all of our sustainability site credits based on how we could get not only our lighting control, which I'll talk about in the next point, but also our stormwater quality control, and make those two credits align. And it was a very difficult process. I thought my civil engineer was going to kill me by the end of the project because we kept switching stuff up on them. But another issue was also the ATFP requirements that we talked about earlier. If you've ever looked into that UFC in depth, there's a lot of limitations for depth of plantings or even standing water on the site. Like, you don't want to have somebody be able to conceal something where you can't inspect. And so it really limited what we were allowed to use for retention basins or how we were allowed to deal with that stormwater. Um, so in the end, we ended up using a sand filter detention basin and grass swales. And we were able to meet that zero post-development discharge, removing all total suspended solids. So that was a huge triumph for the team. We did not think going in that that was going to be possible. We thought this would be a partial credit for us, and we ended up taking it across the finish line and beyond. The light pollution that also tied into this secure site boundary, being a pedestrian campus and inside a highly secure area, of course, the security officers wanted as much light as possible to be able to properly police and observe what was going on all sides of the site. Well, that doesn't jive with light cutoff levels and all the lighting requirements that LEED puts in place. So we had to carefully select what types of lighting we put on the site so that it focused downward and not up, and really focused where our lighting occurred so that we were not close to the site boundary and had that cutoff limits to the next adjacent site, for the LEED credit to be achieved. Daylighting and views, that was one, as discussed before, we knew it was going to be an issue. You start looking at that 74% secure area where the tech spec 705 doesn't even allow you to put windows in on a ground floor. You have to have your sill lines at least 18 foot above grade. So we already had more than half of our building where we could not put a window even if we wanted to. Second floor, we were able to put a few in, but keeping with the flexibility of this design, and it was more of an open office concept. We had some demountable partitions we'd added around for flexibility. And in the end, we just decided that trying to put windows in to get an additional sustainability credit was just not in the best interest of our client and the end users. It would have just caused a security nightmare for them. They would have constantly been having to close blinds or be very aware of their surroundings. And it's not something you want somebody like, let's take one extra thing out of their mind so that they can do their job efficiently. Um, and so the design flexibility also played into that too, because we wanted to be able to add those demountable partitions to create conference room spaces or more private offices, but allow them the ability to take those down in the future and create either more office spaces or relocate them as the adjacencies and the programs changed and grew or shrunk, however it might have happened in any given day. Part of that, we had the entire floor area on the second floor. We incorporated a 28-inch raised access flooring system. So this allowed us to install whips with the electrical outlets so that we could move the electrical outlets in the floor panels up to a 10-foot diameter circle, as workstations moved or printers moved or offices, what have you. We could try our best to accommodate that without having to rerun conduits and wires in the ground. So we tried to locate those as preferably as possible. And all of this came in to allow us to go after an innovation and design credit for flexibility. So some additional items. This is always the running joke if you've ever done a lead design is where's your bike rack? I don't know how many of you have run into that. It's one of the easy credits to get. You just put a bike rack out front and add a couple showers and the box is checked. It's usually pretty easy to work into your program. What made it more humorous on this site is because it's a pedestrian only campus. they couldn't even bring bikes into it. But because it was LEED silver, that was a box we could check. It effectively became called the sculpture at the front entrance, and we put a nice little bike rack. Um, this is one of those issues with sustainability that, okay, it's on the checklist, let's do it. Does it really meet the design intent? Is it something that is really making the environment better if you're not using it? So it's one of those that as you go through projects, you try and do your best, but in this case, we put a sculpture in. um, so the other issue, as I spoke of before, we are part of an existing campus. They already had set exterior materials. So when trying to get that 500-mile radius for obtaining all of our construction materials, or at least a mass majority, when your whole perimeter wall is precast panel, that's really hard to do if your precast and aggregate is not coming from within that 500-mile radius. One saving grace for us during design was that the original quarry that they had gone to for all of the aggregate in the adjacent buildings was closed up. We couldn't even match it if we wanted to. So it opened us up to the opportunity of being able to locally select an aggregate and precast manufacturer that could meet that distance requirement. And we worked with the base architect to pick something that was complementary, didn't really stand out, but allowed us to still feel like part of that campus while still maintaining the sustainability intent. Um, the next thing was landscape design. So this is one of those where the site is very dry, very arid, not a lot of natural moisture or rainfall. And the space design guide called for very specific plantings. So our civil team and our landscape architect worked with the base CE um, to design a planting guide that they were happy with and were willing to allow us to install, but would only require temporary irrigation. So we used that little, hey, you can do this to establish point within the lead credit as long as it's temporary and you take it away after 2 years. So we made sure to look into all of those plants. We picked locally natural plantings that could survive after that initial startup. And again, that also was triggered by the ATFP requirements where we couldn't have plants that were above a certain size on the ground or would allow components you didn't want near your building to be able to be concealed and not noticed. So that all came into effect in working with the local base. And then the last, we also looked at energy efficient mechanical design. This is one of those credits where it's usually one of the easy ones the most design teams with a new facility can check off. You can usually have pretty good control over your mechanical system and try and pick one that works for you and allows you to get the efficiency levels that ASHRAE specifies. On this space, it was very difficult. So not only with the large areas of secure area that we were dealing with that required major air changes at a very high frequency that we don't typically do in a building. Well, there you're running a whole bunch of energy out the window before you've even started. And then being on the existing campus, they already had a set mechanical system that was dictated to us. And so we just didn't have high hopes in preliminary design that this credit was going to be a big point getter for us. So mechanical engineers did some research. They ended up working with the base and specifying ECM motors with built-in inverters and magnet rotors, providing greater efficiency and long-term energy savings. And one of the surprise wins for us was an on-base central plant, which essentially helped provide free cooling technology and generated low-cost chilled water in the wintertime. We also had a dedicated outdoor air system with fan coil units to more efficiently satisfy that 100% outside air requirement required by the security codes. And then the fan coil units modulated and cycled individually with the load. So if there was spaces that weren't occupied, we didn't have to run them. And that allowed for a significantly less fan energy consumption. And then the last real big surprise that this definitely going to give the kudos to our contracting team on this one. During construction, we were trying to recycle as much as we could, and we had the recycling bins on site, really tracking what was going in and out. But just through a side conversation, the contractor was able to make connection with the heavy repair shop on base. And we found out that they were able to accept 30,000 pounds of reinforced concrete pipe. And that allowed us to divert all of that from the waste in local landfills. They were able to reuse that in whatever it was they were working on. So that was that helped us above and beyond on that credit as well, that we never could have anticipated if we hadn't spoken with local base groups. So in the end, I know the chart's really small, but this is our final construction credit that we received from LEED, and we hit that 50 point. Being a design build, we hit that 50, and there was no reason for us to keep going. There was no glory, if you want to say it that way, in trying to get as much as we possibly could. We just were trying to meet that minimum credit for this requirement. So on the next slide, it kind of shows some of the pluses and some of the minuses from our preliminary checklist versus what we ultimately ended up submitting documentation for and got approved from LEED during the design review process. And quick snapshot visually, everything in blue is a plus. Those were things we didn't think we could get that were maybe or no credits that ended up gaining us more points. And everything in gray was points we lost that either we didn't try and go after or just didn't end up being something we designed in the facility and it wasn't something we could really go after. Um, some of the high level ones was the storm quality. So that was our sand detention basin that we had originally planned as a maybe credit and ended up moving that to the yes column. So that gained us a point. The light pollution credit, where we were really concerned about base security not letting us do certain things, that was a maybe credit for us in the beginning, and we were able to achieve that 1 point. The water efficient landscaping, it's ultimately a 4 point credit, or it used to be under LEED 2009. And we had 2 yes and 2 maybe points that we tried to go after. And in the end, after working with the base CE unit, we were able to jump that and get all 4 points. So that was a +2 major win in our box. And then the optimized energy performance for our mechanical systems. That one, we went after 6. We thought maybe we can get 2 more. In the end, we ended up getting a total of 10 points, which we were not at all thinking was possible. So that was a huge win that really pushed us to the finish line and allowed us to not have to go after some of the more finicky credits. And then jumping down to the bottom one, the water efficient landscaping, again, because we got that extra point, this was also a regional priority credit. And so because of that, we got an additional point because it was a high priority for the local region to try and conserve that water. So really, by having that coordination, we gained 2 points. The only ones to really highlight within the gray, that most of them were ones we could have done, we just didn't do the paperwork because we didn't have to. In the end, we didn't have to do the enhanced refrigerant management. We planned for it to be a yes, but there was no materials on the site that fell under that credit, no equipment. So it just wasn't even something to go after. Um, and then we also had construction management plan before occupancy. That was planned as a backup credit and just decided it wasn't worth the time. Um, and then there's also the controllability of systems for thermal comfort. This we identified as a stretch credit in the beginning because of just the sheer number of people. We had 73 people working in this building on a daily basis. And do you really want each of those 73 people to have control of the thermostat? You know, nobody's going to agree on the temperature. And being in an open office, it made that even more challenging. So we were thankful to not have to attempt that one because we didn't think that was going to be very feasible. Even if we could install it end user wise, we thought this would be a nightmare for a maintenance team going on. So we had dropped that one. And then the daylighting in views was one we knew was going to be a stretch credit. We thought we could explain our way out of it and say, well, we did it everywhere we could. And we did it in all the unsecure spaces, but we aren't allowed to because of military codes to do it in any of the secure. In the end, we didn't write it. It didn't really feel right, first of all. I mean, that's 74% of your building you can't put windows in. That's just not the intent of the sustainability credit. So I was glad we didn't have to write that and we were able to find other ways to achieve this. Um, And then the last stretch credit was just educational programming and signage that could have been put up in the building that we didn't end up having to do. So just some pretty eye candy. This is one of the original programming renderings we did, and just calling out some of the materials that we just discussed that are more visible to any occupant on the base. You don't have to be working in this facility to see these features. The windows on the first floor, those were all within secure private offices. So it was just one occupant having to do that window control. Um, so that was a risk that the government was willing to take, and we provided the severely tinted windows. They're all fixed, which is a requirement of Tech Spec 705, and they were all above that 18-foot sill height. The precast panels, which was the entire perimeter of the facility, and that was our biggest shining moment for the regional credit of material acquisition. And then we also have the lighting that you see along the walkway that's pointed out. They were diffused lighting that reflected down instead of up into the air to try and control that lighting cutoff. And then finally, you see the vegetation, the different types that were put in there, local grasses and swales, and some trees, but very minimal. It was more bush size, um, kind of just adding to that pedestrian environment. So finally, just to gloss over some lessons learned as we were going from all the way from design through construction. Um, you can still have a very sustainable building and still meet the design intents that these building codes and these organizations are really pushing for to create this better planet for us all. Um, it's not easy. You have to want to do it. Really, eh, I think a lot of ways the codes write it so you can have these cop outs and these, oh, that doesn't apply. And I've been guilty of using them myself. But really, in the end, it's trying to make that extra push to make that environment and still design a building that is easy to maintain and works for its end users and its final function. Um, Really, what helped us out a lot was planning for ample stretch credits or backup credits, things that we don't think we can get, but we're going to try really, really hard before we say this is a no. Um, as you saw, a lot of things that we gained or didn't decide to go after was because we gained stuff we didn't think we could get. So that's a huge planning thing when your team's looking at a project. Really take a good look. Don't just glance through and check the boxes, think about it, and work together to see if there's a solution, because there might be one you're not thinking of. Um, and that goes into, creative thinking, alternative compliance. Are there ways that you can get this, follow the intent of what the code, the sustainability guide is trying to write, that could push a maybe to a yes? You may not do it the exact way they're saying, but maybe you can prove you're still meeting the intent and doing the goodness for the environment. And then just be realistic in your planning and programming. Don't think you can get something that there's no way you're going to get. And I think a lot of that is understanding the security codes in this instance, and knowing the limitations and the things we're really going to have to fight for to make it happen, and if it's worth it. And then the final last one that I would highly recommend is just asking your clients, your local installation, your community, wherever your building is located, what do you already have in place? One thing Schriever has in place that we didn't end up having to submit was they already had a pest control program, a huge document they wrote up for how to naturally rid their buildings of pests without having to use pesticides and other means that aren't deemed environmentally friendly. So that was something that would have been very easy for us to submit as an innovation and design credit without having to do a lot of extra paperwork. And things like that you might not know unless you ask, because the clients don't always know to tell you. So um, with that, that brings us to the end of our presentation. I hope you found it helpful. And Daniel, I'll pass it back to you.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you, Jessica, as well, for your presentations here. So we're just about ready to start the Q&A session. So if you have any questions, I know we've got a couple here, but feel free to keep putting them in the Q&A tab. And if you see one that you like in there, click on the thumbs up icon to help it rise up through some of the other questions there, and we'll take as many as we can get to in our remaining time. And for those of you who are asking, In the handouts tab, the slide deck and a copy of your PDA certificate is available for download. If you want to take a closer look at any of the drawings or tables or the LEED certification documents that Jennifer and Jessica shared, you can grab them from that tab as well. So my first question here for Jennifer and Jessica, and I'm going to bring you on screen here if that's all right as we start this. My first question for you is, like you said, this project, you started the design in 2015, right? And then it completed construction in 2017. So obviously it's 2022 now. I'm sure that there's been some changes and updates in LEED and security needs for federal buildings since then. So what do you think are kind of the big changes since then for our audience to know about?
So I'll say one, and then I'll pass it off to Jessica because she's more of our sustainability expert. But the biggest one that comes to mind is just the fact that now projects are required to do third-party certification under these sustainability codes in the UFC. That was not something that was around until the last couple years. So kind of rolling this into one of the other questions I see about how many LEED Silver secure facilities have really been done is I don't think there's been a lot because the code wasn't forcing people to get the certification. A lot of times the design team would be told, yeah, design to it, but we're not going to prove we did it. We aren't going to pay for the documentation. Well, that's all changing now. The government's going to be required to have these projects certified, and we're going to have to actually go through this documentation process. And I think you'll start to see a lot more of these facilities pop up as the years go on, and you see some of these come from design and into construction. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Jess.
Well, I guess that said, there are now multiple options for third-party certification. So you could get your go for guiding principles compliance through GBI instead of going for LEED through GBC or US GBC. Those are the two main ones that are mentioned in the UFC. I am not aware if anyone has petitioned for other third-party certifications, but they have tried to open it up to encourage competition.
Mhm.
I think that another thing that has changed is some of the low-hanging fruit credits that don't necessarily make sense have gone away.
The bike sculpture.
Yeah, the bike sculpture is no longer in LEED version 4.1. They tied that bicycle credit to being a certain distance from bicycle paths. Therefore, we couldn't use that or capture that credit here. Other things is they've tightened the radius for materials. Your materials have to be harvested, created. Yeah, I mean, they've further defined that within a 100-mile radius to get that local materials credit. So they've kind of raised the bar with LEED, which was always the intention. If you've heard Rick Fedrizzi, who is the former CEO of USGBC, he always used to say that his goal was to put himself out of a job, that we wouldn't need LEED, hopefully, by the time 2025 or 2030 rolled around. So.
All right. Well, thank you both. So here's another one. It says, how does or have you seen the recent privatization of utilities affecting the ability of bases or units to achieve LEED certification, if required or desired?
I have not personally seen that. I think it would rely more heavily on local utility monitoring to achieve some of the credits. I know that that might result in something similar to what we dealt with at Schriever, where we had a very set system and different types to work from. We only had one or two options to choose from instead of the whole gamut. So I could see that causing a little bit more of a challenge, but I think it's something that could be overcome.
Agreed. I don't really have anything to add about that other than I know that at Stanley Consultants we have an energy group and that they are currently working with some U.S. military bases on microgrids and using renewable energy on the microgrids. So if you're interested in more information on that, I could put you in touch with the people that are doing that at our company.
All right, thanks. I know we've definitely covered a lot of microgrids in TME as well, so I will put a plug in for that. We just came out with our energy issue in March, April. There's definitely a lot of great insights in there on what is happening on microgrids and other renewable energy across military installations there. So this one here from Megan Baker, she asks, how do you decide which TPC system to use for federal buildings since there are options?
Well, I guess usually we leave it up to the preference of the military branch that we're working with. Some branches, such as the Army, do have specific preferences. They prefer lead. The Navy and Air Force, I believe, have it written in the UFC that they can do either or. So then we kind of leave it up to the client. Jennifer, do you have anything to add?
I don't. I mean, we've never really been given the option personally that we've had to analyze and decide which way we wanted to go as a design team. Usually that is dictated to us in our scope of work or for the organization we're working for. So I think that aligns with what I've seen as well.
Okay. And this one comes from Seth Adu here, who asks, what suggested avenues to influence ICD 705 SCIF building to make the government aware of new materials that are fire, water, and even ballistic resistant, exceeding NIJ level 4, Miami-Dade NOA for hurricane level 5, seismic zone 4, and does not support mold mildew growth?
So this one's a little more challenging to tackle. I will say the last two versions of the 705 that has been updated, they've really tried to open up some material choices and allow the design team to use their own research with manufacturers to meet the intent of the security code, but without putting us into a corner. They used to dictate, here's your design wall assembly. You are not deviating from this. You are going to have these materials. That's gone now, at least to a point that gives design teams a lot more flexibility to find the proper acoustic ratings or ballistic ratings or whatever might apply to your specific site that allows us to help influence the client and say, hey, we've seen this really cool thing. What do you think? And take it to the site security manager or up to the AO to approve that and say, yeah, you can put that in this building. And that really is dictated by your region that you're constructing in and who has the authority to say yes or no now.
Right, thanks. Jessica, anything else to add on to that?
No, yeah, when it comes down to it, it's all up to the SSO. So.
All right, fantastic. Okay, this is the same one. So it looks like don't really have any other questions in here unless we have a little bit more time in here if anybody else wants to get one last one in here. But if not, like I said, the handouts tab, you can grab the slide deck and a copy of your PDH certificate. There's also some more information about Stanley Consultants in there and a copy of the original article in TME in case you did not read it when it was printed the first time. So feel free to grab those before we go. And other than that, so thank you to Jennifer and thank you to Jessica for taking some time today to go in more in depth about your article. And thank you to all of our attendees out there for listening in. If you're interested in submitting an article to the military engineer, you can visit our website. It has our editorial calendar and our writer's guidelines on there. We're currently open to proposals for our September-October issue, which is going to focus on asset management and resilience and preparedness. And you can find the dates for all of our content deadlines online at our website. For more education and training opportunities, check out our upcoming JTC conference in Aurora, Colorado. It's coming up this May 10th through the 12th. You can join your friends and colleagues from across the AEC profession and join engineering community for 3 days of education, training, and networking. So then, on behalf of SAME, the military engineer, and our featured presenters, thank you all for joining us today. Everyone have a great rest of your day.